This is Danny Bobrow, President of AIM Dental Marketing, welcoming you to this installment of the Practice Perfection Web-Based Education Series. Today's presentation is entitled Practice Transitions and Growth Mastery, the exciting and rewarding journey from startup to exit. The present practice climate makes it an exciting time to contemplate a practice purchase or transition into retirement. That's why we're so excited to have Joe Rossi with us today. Joe is CEO of Joe Rossi and Associates. JRA is built on a diverse set of real estate and practice transition solutions for healthcare professionals. Their commitment to the highest quality dental brokerage services and results is unrivaled. Since its inception, JRA has focused exclusively on delivering practice transition guidance to healthcare professionals. They have completed hundreds of healthcare-specific transactions. Their passion and commitment are what drives every successful transition. As an attendee at today's webcast, you will learn options for entering practice ownership, understand current market conditions and how they affect the practice transition, master the pricing and lending process for rapid, increased ROI, demystify the dental practice startup process, gain a clear comprehension of the practice valuation and selling timeline, and hear about the most important factors to consider when buying a practice. Today's webcast will run for around 90 minutes. While attendees are in listen-only mode, we invite you at any time to submit your question or comments using the question button on your screen. We will allow time following the presentation to get your questions answered. If we do not get to your question during the webcast, we'll see that it's answered shortly thereafter. Attendance at this presentation entitles you to apply to receive 1.5 hours of continuing education credit. Shortly following the webcast, we will send you an email with instructions for receiving your CE. Participants are cautioned about the dangers of incorporating techniques and procedures into their practice if the course has not provided them with adequate clinical experience to allow them to perform them competently. And now with that, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the Practice Perfection stage, Mr. Joe Rossi. Hello, Joe.
Hey, Danny, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
All right, excited to get started and learn about real estate and some practice transition knowledge of the market. Pleasure to be here. And I'd like to tell a little bit about the background of Joe Rossi and Associates. We were started in 2011, and we are real estate and practice brokers. I know the term broker sometimes has a negative connotation, and we're hoping to change that tonight and learn about what's going on in the marketplace. So it's exciting. The company was founded on there was a need in the market for dentists to have high quality representation. There were so many dentists in the marketplace that weren't receiving high quality representation in transactions, real estate transactions with landlords who are savvy and sophisticated, and the landlords will take advantage of you if you let them. So that's why we were formed, and it gives us a lot of pleasure to kind of even the playing field among landlords who are savvy and get incentives for our doctors that are well deserved. What's unique about our company is we specialize in working with dentists in real estate transactions and also practice advisory. There are a lot of other companies out there that either specialize in one or the other, but most don't do both. And doing both really gives us a competitive advantage, not only for us, but also for our clients. Real estate transactions for dentists and practice transitions are directly related. And understanding how these two different service types are related gives us a ton of insight that helps our clients out.
Excuse me one second, Joe.
Yes, sir.
Just want to make sure. Are you advancing the slides? Should we be seeing another slide now? Just want to make sure your system
Yes.
is. There we
We're
are.
going to be on,
Okay.
we're going to be on
Okay.
slide 2, Danny. That was me. I got a little excited there.
No worries.
So
That's fine. It happens.
yeah. So we have really strong relationships with our clients. We've grown over the years. There will be some clients we did their initial startup with them, and then we are now working on their 7th or 8th practice or selling a practice. The relationship with our clients is it's very important. It's not just a transaction to us. Having somebody that you could trust and rely on is important to your practice growth. And you want to work with people who are going to care about you, care about the information they're giving you, and take pride and ownership in their dealings. And that relationship, that attention to our relationship has really helped us grow throughout the years, and we've just made a lot of great connections and relationships with our clientele. So whoever you work with as your broker, it's important that they truly care and understand your needs and understand the material and content of your transaction. So some of the services that we provide our clientele, what we do is starting a dental practice from scratch, relocating or expanding your current practice, lease review, whether you're renewing your lease, purchasing a practice, or selling a practice. In every one of those scenarios, there is a lease review that is an important part of that transaction, and we understand that. We also help you sell your practice, buy a practice, or buying and selling your property is our areas of focus. So I wanted to get into just talking about practice ownership in its most basic form. What are the things that are important? And we like to get down to the most basic form. Why do you want to practice? Is a very important question to ask yourself. What are the motivations? Are they financial? Are they a sense of control? I mean, do you not like working for somebody else? Do you want to create something of your own? Do you want to create a sense of accomplishment in your practice? Do you want to build something? Do you want to be a leader? As a practice owner, whether you like it or not, you are the leader of your practice, and your staff, your patients, and everybody around you is going to follow your lead. And practice ownership requires being a leader. So those are some very, basic questions you want to ask yourself and outline the why. Why do you want to do this for yourself? Now, is practice ownership feasible? You want to look at the feasibility of it. Generally speaking, getting into practice ownership and financing it is kind of the easy part. Finding the right opportunity that works for you is the little bit more challenging part. So by outlining your motivations will help you get to your end goal. When we have doctors who have a clear understanding of what they want, it helps us best find the best fit for them. And in order to really get the practice and vision that you want, you need to talk and define what your vision is. Understanding what you're looking for in a practice and really visualize it and think about all the different aspects of what you want is key. The most successful doctors we work with clearly know and envision everything about their practice. So I would advise doctors looking to get into practice ownership to really visualize, write down what their vision is. And here are some items that could kind of guide you to that perfect vision. One, you should write it down, and you should share your vision with others. Others who have experience with already having a successful practice is a great place to start. And talking to them, learning what's worked for them, what hasn't, their experiences, the positives, the negatives, and really kind of talking about it with those who have already done it. You know, you need to think about how your practice is going to affect certain areas of your life, your family, your friends, your faith, you financially. How does this affect your financial goals, your obligations, your business, professional, and clinical goals? And then also what else you may want to do in your career. You may have other life pursuits that are going to be affected by your practice ownership and your practice vision. So visualizing is really the key to getting the framework for the perfect practice ownership. It's important to get some work experience. We find when we work with new doctors, you know, they base their vision of what they want in their practice off of their already work history. You know, they may hate how the current doctor runs a practice, or they'd like to do something different, and they want it their way. And that sometimes is their driving factor for practice ownership in creating their own practice and making it their way. So let's get into some of the particulars about what is in the vision. First, when you're thinking about practice ownership and the perfect practice, this is a long-term game. You're making a substantial investment of money and time. So you not only need to be thinking 1 year from now, but 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now. And you can't be short-sighted. It is a long-term perspective. And we see sometimes doctors are too short-sighted. So think long-term, because your investment in money and time is great. Now, as far as one of the first things you should do when you want to get into practice ownership, create your vision, is just do a personal check of your finances and make sure that you're qualified to buy a practice. Most doctors that we work with have no problem with financing, but some of the younger doctors who have a lot of student debt sometimes are fearful to take on more debt. And I think that is more just fear of anything, because you could still find a great practice, still have a lot of student debt and get funding for it. And once your practice is successful, it's actually going to accelerate your freedom from that student debt. So, you know, managing your business and personal finances is pretty self-explanatory. Don't take on too much debt, but if you find the right opportunity, be assured that there's good sources of funding out there, and don't be afraid to take on debt. We want good debt, not bad debt. So when you're thinking about the vision, one thing that's very important is, just the geographic of where do you want to practice? How far do you want to drive every day? Where are you willing to live? Most of the doctors that we work with are pretty open geographically to where the right practice is. They'll travel for the right practice, or they want to live close to home and get a good work-life type of balance. So thinking about the geographic is very important. And there's, you could work in an urban area, you could work in a suburban area, or you could work in a rural area. And there are distinctive advantages and disadvantages of all those markets. The urban and suburban areas tend to be a little bit more competitive, closer to where people work, but the rural practice in smaller towns could be very rewarding financially, but you don't get all of the benefits of urban and suburban living. But think about where the practice is going to be geographically and what the setting's going to be. And after you know where you want to practice, you want to know who the patient you're targeting is. What is their age? What is their income level? What is their education? What is the density of the ages you are targeting? So you need to match your skill set as a dentist to that particular demographic. And demographic information is pretty abundant. It's out there. You need to have a set idea of who your patient is and who you're targeting. And we'll get into what to look for in demographics a little bit later in the presentation. But after you know where you want to practice, who you're targeting, it's really important to know what type of insurances you're going to take and what type of practice it's going to be. Is it going to be a fee-for-service practice? Is it going to be a PPO? Are you going to take Medicaid? Are you going to take HMO? Is it going to be mixed? So what we've really seen is the successful practice owners really specialize in a particular provider. Like mixing Medicaid with fee-for-service doesn't work. So each of these providers really have a uniqueness to them. And you want to have a focus on your practice on which of these providers you're going to want to specialize in, because you can't be everything to everybody, and be specialized, because all of these practices operate distinctly different depending upon what type of provider you are. So have a specialization in who you're providing for and know your patient inside and out. Now, once your vision is created, there is a lot of different vehicles to get you to practice ownership. And the biggest first question you're going to have to ask yourself is, do you want to start up from scratch or do you want to buy? Most doctors want to buy a practice because it's instant gratification and it's just the easier, more preferred option. But there is limitations to it. So knowing which route to go is important. And my advice would be to really explore both routes, startup and practice acquisition. But from our experience, practice owners tend to be one or the other. Doctors who like to do the startup tend to keep doing the startup, and vice versa with the practice acquisition. Now, maybe you're not sure on whether to do a startup or whether to acquire. So we've come up with one question that really may help you determine whether you're a startup or a practice acquisition. And that question would be, do you like the idea of being an entrepreneur and creating your own vision exactly how you envision and want it? Or do you like the idea of plugging and playing from a previous practice owner? And if you can answer that question, it will kind of, if you feel strongly about this question one way or another, that will kind of guide you to what roadmap is best for you. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons of startup and the acquisition. You have to figure out whether you're a builder or a buyer. So as a startup, some of the pros of a startup are you determine your timeline to practice ownership. If you want to do a startup, your office could be up and running 6 months from today. You control the timeline. If you want to do this, you could go out, find a property, and start that process. You don't need to wait around for the right opportunity. It's in your control. With a startup, you get to create the culture with your employees and your patients. With a startup, you get to create the look and feel of your office. With a startup, you determine the patient experience. You will create it. It will be what you envision. With a startup, there is a strong value add proposition. And what do I mean by that? A startup loan from soup to nuts is going to cost you somewhere around $600,000, and that's recently increased because of what's going on in the world, supply chain issues, increases in construction costs. But no matter how much your practice does in revenue, your debt is still going to be $600,000. Where if you acquire a practice, if you're acquiring an income stream, you're going to pay a larger dollar for that. But with the startup, your loan amount is set. So you could exponentially go higher in your collections and create value, which is a really strong proposition for the startup. You get to implement your vision exactly as you created it in your head. Now, the cons, the negatives of a startup, they're big. No cash flow, no patience. That could be pretty scary. You have to create and set up the operations, the management, the culture, and you have no historical data on practice performance. A startup is scary. That's why it could be so rewarding. It's a risk-reward analysis. Now let's talk about the practice acquisition. The practice acquisition has instant cash flow. After you buy that practice, you're making money day one. The staff, the office, the operations, the management, it's all in place. You don't have to do anything. Your patients are already there. They're already established. They're going to be coming in. It's literally plug and play. Some of the negatives of a practice acquisition there is a lack of inventory of good practices for sale. There are extraordinarily more buyers for practices than there are good practices to meet that need. The timeline for ownership in a practice acquisition could be unknown. We often will start talking to a potential client about a practice acquisition and be having the same conversations 2, 3, 4, 5 years from the time that we initially started talking because of that lack of inventory and lack of options. And when a good practice does come on the market, there is larger, sophisticated buyers who are willing to pay premiums for that practice. And really, the doctor who this is the hardest for is the doctor who's buying their first practice. You know, they're not going to be in position to, you know, give the offer that the seller is looking for when there's more sophisticated, experienced buyers out there that may not need bank financing that are going to beat you to the punch. So practice acquisition could be especially frustrating for a doctor who is looking to purchase their first practice. And also in a practice acquisition, we'll often see many times the capital improvements needed post-closing is often misjudged. Like the construction job and improvements is a lot more expensive than the doctor who bought the practice initially thought. And the equipment may need to be upgraded. So after the practice acquisition, sometimes the dollar amount of large investments is underestimated, and that would be another negative regarding practice acquisition. But to summarize, there is no right or wrong answer. You could be successful in a startup, you could be successful in an acquisition, or you could mess them up. But there is no right or wrong answer. It's personal to what type of operator you're going to be and what type of person you are. So give that consideration when you're thinking about your practice roadmap. I wanted to get into real estate in general, all of our services that encompass real estate and real estate in general for your practice. Real estate is a key factor in determining your overall practice success. Your real estate houses your most important asset, and that's your practice and your practice image. Every practice acquisition has a real estate component to it. Your real estate determines how the world looks at you, how you're perceived, what your image is. You will be judged on the type of real estate that you're in. So think long and hard about what type of image you want to present to your patients. And real estate is unique. You may have a practice that does the same procedures as you and may be your competitor. But that competitor cannot have the same real estate as you. It is all unique. So it is a very important decision in your practice. Not only the financials, the line items of the rent, maybe the down payment on the purchase, and also when you go to exit. You may transfer the real estate you're in through a lease, or you may own the building and sell it to the doctor who's acquiring your practice, or you may lease it back from the doctor acquiring your practice. There will be a real estate component throughout your entire career, regardless of whether you own, lease, purchase, or start up a practice. So have somebody who really understands the dynamics of real estate to give you their advice about it. So I'm going to jump over to a question we get very often, and it's owning versus leasing your real estate. There are pros and cons of each. The pro of owning your real estate is you have control. You could also receive financial benefits from owning your real estate. You could also, that can also work against you too. You could have financial mismanagement from owning your real estate. The key to your real estate owning versus leasing question to yourself should be not whether you could own or lease your real estate or the financials of the real estate component, but the driving factor should be, what is the best real estate for my practice? You're going to get much more financial incentive from your practice than you will with your real estate. So don't get caught up on, do I want to own or do I want to lease? The question should be, what is the best option? What is the best space real estate option for my practice? Buying real estate requires a large cash incentive. You need to come up with a down payment of, some lenders do as little as 10%. Some traditionally do 20%. But not only do you have to come up with the down payment on a purchase, you also forego tenant improvement allowance, known as sometimes TI, which is basically cash incentives that landlords give to you when you lease space. So let's just take a $500,000 property. You have to come up with, say, 20% down, $100,000 in cash, and then you'd be foregoing what you may receive from a landlord on the same building, which, let's say the typical building is a 2,500 square foot space. For lease, you may receive $150,000, $200,000 from the landlord, so it's much more cash intensive. And the owning versus leasing question definitely changes throughout your career. The younger your practice is, and you are in your career, leasing makes more sense. Now, if you have an established practice where you know the patients are going to come to you regardless of what your location is, then owning real estate may make a lot more sense. But as a new office, there isn't many options to own real estate. There's probably 10 times the amount of lease options than there are purchase options. So again, going back to do what's right for your practice and not get hung up on owning or leasing real estate. Both opportunities work, and they have very different projections depending upon which stage you are in your career. Now, we're going to get into the startup process for a dental office. The startup is alive and well. You will hear a lot of negativity towards a startup. It can't be done. Corporations are taking over. Startups don't work. A startup is too hard. The market is too competitive. I don't really believe any of that. The startup is alive and well. Lenders are still funding 100% of the project cost for a startup. That's not that common in any line of business. If there is a lender who is going to risk large dollar amounts on a startup practice, that should give you some certainty and some comfort that somebody is willing to invest a large dollar amount in a first-time startup business. That really doesn't happen across any other businesses. So have comfort, have confidence that a startup can be done. I think we did at least 25 fresh startups last year. And the failure rate of the startup is still under 1%. I feel like people overly exaggerate how hard a startup could be. Don't buy into it. The startup is alive and well. You can do it. Let's get into the process of a startup, of an expansion, of a relocation, and kind of go through some of the details and considerations you should have while attempting a startup, an expansion, or relocation. One is you have to find a location. So what tangible, real information can we use to pinpoint the perfect location for our practice? And a good starting point is demographics. You have really demographics and competition analysis are kind of one and the same thing in our eyes. When we evaluate demographics for somebody, we also take a pretty deep dive into the competition as well. Some of the basic demographic stats are, of course, density, income levels, age, household spending habits. I mean, you could pretty much find more demographics than you need. There is information out there that will outline and differentiate a number of different areas to let you know a lot about the people who live in it. You want to cater your skill set to the demographic. You know, if you do all in four cases, you may want to be in an area where there's a lot of older people. Or if you're a specialist and your main referral source is general dentist, you want to be located somewhere where there's a high density of general dentists. And all this information is kind of like it's in our heads now from doing this so long. But, going back to like learning what your vision is and what you want to do, we can easily pinpoint that to a certain area because of the demographic information that we've researched in the past. So getting into some of the particulars of demographics and competition analysis is the competition. How do you evaluate if a market is competitive or not? And what we found is the best stat to tell you how competitive a market is the dentist to density ratio. And what that ratio is simply a particular point on a map divided by the number of people in a certain area to the number of dentists. For example, these are typically done in like a 1, a 3, and sometimes a 5-mile radius. But a 5-mile radius is a little bit too big for me, unless you're a specialist. So what we would consider a competitive market is any market that has between a 0 and 1,200 number. And that's, again, the number of dentists to the number of population in a particular radius point. So if the dentist to dentist ratio is anywhere between 0 and 1,200, I would say that's a competitive market. Anywhere between 1,200 and 1,800, I would say is the average moderatively competitive market. Anything over 2,000, I would consider that a soft area of the market.
And Joe, if I could just elaborate a little bit on that. I know you and we talked about that. I think this is the key statistic because when you talk about, people will often ask, what should my radius be for my marketing, for instance, or in deciding whether to buy a practice or not. In my mind, the great equalizer is this ratio of population to practitioner. You can imagine looking at, just for purposes of comparison, a practice located in Missoula, Montana. Compare that with a practice located in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Obviously, the population density is far greater in Manhattan than it is in Missoula. As a result of that, people are ready, willing, able, and required to travel a greater distance to get not just a dentist, but groceries and drugs and whatever else, whatever other staples that they get to live. And so for me, the question really, this is the question to be answered. It's not a radius, because the radius could be 30 miles, it could be a third of a mile, depending on the population density. So I agree with you. I think you're spot on in pointing this out as probably the key demographic to consider in deciding that not only where to locate, but also to drive your marketing decisions.
Yeah, exactly, Danny. There's a number of components to this. So if you're in a site close to, say, a Costco, a Walmart, or a large retailer, you're going to benefit from being close to that retailer. For example, Walmart probably draws from 8 to 10 miles out. So, your density ratio is completely different if you're in a site that draws people from a large radius. So,
yeah, that's a great point too, because there are traffic patterns, or there are anchor stores. So, just dentists are sometimes not comfortable realizing it, but they're local area merchants. They're like any retail outlet, because right or wrong, people will base their decision to visit a dentist for the first time not perhaps on the more valid factors about quality, experience, breadth of service, scope of service, but convenience. And that's why in marketing, you want to make sure you're ranked high when people are searching for a dentist near me, for instance, because that's what Google knows people are going to be searching for most often. And the only other thing that I would add is you can look at the ratio, the population density per practitioner. Another factor, which is sometimes a challenge to ascertain, but it is possible, is, well, not only how many practitioners are there out there or in your immediate considered service area, but how successful are they as marketers? Because the true competition lies in how effective they are in reaching out to the same target that you're reaching out to. And you can do that by doing online search, for instance, or just paying attention to your own mailbox to see what kind of mailers you're getting from your competitors. So just a few things to sort of round out the discussion I thought I'd share at this point.
Yes. And if you made location decisions just on dentist to density ratios, you'd make a lot of bad decisions, because it's only one component of what truly makes up a good location. You have to drill down. Yeah. You have to drill
one data
down
point.
To the. Yeah, you have, and it could look deceiving. Oh, this is a great area. There's nobody here. Maybe there's a reason there's nobody there. Maybe it butts up against that. Maybe it butts up on a highway and there's a forest preserve. Maybe there's a large park. You know, you have to look at it on an aerial, and then there's also a on the street type of analysis that you have to do. And then there's a convenience to it too. You know, I could have the best dentist to density ratio in the best area, but if I can't enter the site properly, it's all for naught. So you can't get, and that's why I mentioned here, you can't get too hyper-focused on demographics.
Yeah, no, that's another great point too. Yeah, I've worked with so many dentists that they've owned their practice for 30 years and they've never gone through the front door, or they've never driven the access that other people would have to drive to find the practice. So that's an excellent point too, is you think about it, especially at the beginning of your decision, try to experience the practice from your patient's perspective, not your own.
Yeah, do they see you? Is it convenient to get by me? Or are they shopping somewhere nearby? It's pretty basic stuff. But we tell our clients we would rather see you in a high visibility, high traffic, very competitive market than to be in an inferior location in a market that has a dentist to density ratio of 5,000 plus. You're better off being in a good site in a competitive market than you are in a less competitive market in a bad site. So
agreed.
Don't get too hyper-focused. Don't get too hyper-focused on demographics. It's only maybe 25-30% of the overall location analysis, but it's a good starting point. And it wouldn't be right if you did look at the demographics and the competition analysis, that wouldn't make any sense either, but it's only a portion. So leading into the next slide, I'd like to get to like some of the detail we get into these demographic reports. Like this, for example, I believe this was a report we did for an oral surgeon who wanted to inquire about this particular area in like LaGrange. So we picked LaGrange, Illinois, suburban area, densely populated. So we get down to this level where we're seeing the dentist on a map, we're picking out a geographic, and now we could look at the particular doctors, go to their website, see if they pop up on Google, see how their office looks. So taking this analysis this is kind of the next level of the analysis, because sometimes there could be a bunch of doctors here, but they're all in their upper 70s and they're all going to be gone, unfortunately, in a couple of years. So you got to look inside the details to figure out what the landscape of the market is. And it's a couple different layers. And getting down to that layer, that's the fun part of finding a site. And it gives you all, the particular, like we talked about, the median age, the household income, the population. We have the competitors, their names listed out. And this information is very helpful in finding areas of interest. So once you've found location, you have your practice vision, you know what you want to do, you figured out if you're buying, if you're a builder, or if you're a buyer. Now you have the location, and there's a number of people who are involved in this transaction. It's not just you, it's about assembling people who specialize in certain aspects of getting an office open. And here I listed out the people that we most frequently work with on a transaction and are going to be a part of your startup. If they're not, you might be doing something wrong. So you need to have a banker, a builder, an equipment and supply rep, a real estate broker, a marketing company, a CPA, a consultant. And a consultant can play many different roles. Some consultants handle this entire process. Some just come in and do credentialing or help with hiring or help get the office manuals in order. They could have a lot of different roles to play. And all of these team members are an important part of your practice ownership. And some of them are part of startups and practice acquisitions. So finding a lender that is familiar with dental is essential. Often, or not that often, but sometimes people will come to us with their business banker pre-qualified them for a startup loan. And then once we get into the nuts and bolts of the deal, that lender usually doesn't do the transaction. Very rarely will any deal get funded that's outside of a dental banker. And there's a number of dental bankers throughout your market who just specialize in dental. That's the person you want to talk to. That person has great knowledge and detail of what your cost should be to get your practice up and running. And we'll jump into that a little bit later and give you the actual breakdown of what your loan should look like and how the cost should be allocated. And all of these team members are a portion of your startup loan. The builder, it is also very important that the builder has dental experience. You don't want somebody to build your office who has never built a dental office before or has built maybe one or two. Most of the builders in our market have built hundreds of dental offices and have a ton of experience. There are a couple different methods to building a dental office, and you can either go with a design build concept, or you could get architectural done and then you could contract out the bids. In every market is a little different. In a Chicago market here, most of the builders are design build. So that means you're going to meet one builder who is going to have an architect that they work with all the time and handle the entire building process from design to permitting to eventual construction. Again, or you could get an architect to do the architectural plans for your office, and then you could submit that usually to multiple builders who will then bid on the project. And there is no right or wrong way to do it. Every market seems to be a little different, but the design build is just, it's nice keeping everything in one place. Your builder is also part of the architectural team. It makes it simple. The builder and the next team member work with each other pretty hand in hand on the project, which is the equipment and supply rep. The builder and the equipment rep will kind of function together to make sure the build is up to the standards to fit the equipment that you're going to eventually house the practice with. Just going back to the building for a minute, building costs are really, I don't want to say skyrocketing, but building your dental office is getting more expensive. Just within the last 6 months to a year, the price of building an office has increased, I don't know, 25% or so. And that's really kind of affected the total dollar amount that most of our startup clients are taking out to complete their loans. And that's been kind of a recent development. You should work with a real estate broker that knows dental. Our firm, we've been looking for dental spaces for the past 12 years on a daily basis, every day. So we have exceptional insight on what you're looking for and can kind of streamline the whole process for you. Like knowing how all these team members work together as your real estate gives you, as your real estate broker, knowing that streamlines the entire process for you. If you went to a real estate broker who didn't have any experience in this, they may start sending you properties off of the MLS where residential properties are, and it would just make the process excruciating. We have historical data on over 400 dental offices. We know how much the rent is at this dental office, how much TI the landlord gave them, how much square feet they took. All that insight just makes for an easier process and really exceptional insight to picking out a location. Having a good marketing team as a startup is essential, and there's a lot of considerations that you have to make. Marketing has become ever more important. The doctors who know how to market their practice to the world do better, much better than doctors who don't. And the sophistication of it and the importance of it has become essential, where in the past, the old model of how dental offices market, they didn't market themselves. They were just built off of, one patient telling another. And that's why they could go into office settings and the location wasn't that important. Today, location and marketing are essential to getting your startup running fast, and running successfully. And Danny, you do marketing. What would you have to add to somebody doing a startup on what their considerations should be?
Well, yeah. Thanks for the opening there. I would first of all just check in, just as you vet any of these other partners, members of your team. Do they focus on the dental profession? How long have they been around? Are they willing to share references with you? Can they cite case studies of similar situations? If you're a startup, have they worked with startups? What basically is their experience? What sort of analyses are they willing to do? Just like you probably are willing or ought to be willing to offer a complimentary exam, x-rays, and consultation to encourage a prospective patient to cross your threshold, are they willing to do likewise? Are they willing to invest the time to demonstrate their credibility, authority, and value to you before they expect you to sign on the dotted line? I would say those would be table stakes in terms of choosing the right marketing firm.
Yeah. So the next slide is just a breakdown of your loan. This is what your loan balance should look like after your job is completed. And each portion has a set allocation that your lender will kind of keep you in line with. And these are kind of the set standard of what you should spend on what. But it's a good indication of the entire project, who's involved, and how much you have to pay to get these portions of the project completed. And again, the construction costs are going up. A year ago, this might have been $550, $500, but we've recently changed the loan to about $600,000. Again, the location. You know, picking the right location is going to accelerate your practice growth. Being in high visibility, high exposure is essential. And if you could be close to a grocery store, a Walmart, something where there is heavy traffic coming into the site with people who live nearby, is the best location. The office model of going into an office building with a ton of other dentists is dead. It's been dead. It's been dead for years. It just doesn't happen anymore. And even practices that are in office settings, they're harder to sell. And if you're not producing a certain collection amount, they go unsold, or you'll end up doing a chart sale or not selling the practice at all. But know the economic setup of your startup is pretty much broken down. I would say the average startup in a very good visible location, I would say on average, is somewhere between $5,000 to $6,000 of monthly rent on a 2,000 square foot office. Most startups sign a minimum of 10 years on their lease, and the landlord typically gives anywhere from a year to a year and a half of incentive, cash incentive to a startup to use towards their construction costs. So to break that out, if your annual rent is $60,000 per year, the landlord should be contributing at least $60,000 to $90,000 in cash that you could use towards your build-out costs and even sometimes equipment costs. But the whole startup process is set up where it's easy for you up front. It's not day one. The rent is full throttle. The loan is due. It's not set up that way. There's a ramp up period. You get free rent. You get cash incentives. The lenders give leeway to when the loan payments are due. So know that you have some cushion to the cost building up. And usually within a couple months, you have patients coming in the door. So you really don't feel a large burden initially. It will catch up in time while your practice is growing. So after you found the location, you know the economics, you're doing all your touch-up due diligence, finalized staging. After we've negotiated all the terms, there will be a lease review where you'll engage an attorney and they'll look over the legality of the lease or sales contract that you have on your space, and you'll be finalizing your banking, your construction. You'll be starting marketing. You'll be doing the credentialing, getting ready for your grand opening, and starting your dream. Lease negotiations. We have clients that will hire us to review their lease. And there's three particular times that a lease review is needed and very important. When your lease on your existing space is up, you don't just need to renew it. It's a fresh start, whether you have options or not. Don't just renew your lease. You could negotiate for more terms. Landlords will give you incentives on your lease renewal. Sometimes they won't. Landlords definitely have more leverage when it comes to renewals than your initial lease, but it has to be reviewed. It has to be negotiated. Don't just keep renewing your lease. We often see doctors have escalated their lease 3, 4, 5% each year, and that buildup over time can be very dramatic. It can make it hard to sell your practice because the line item on your practice performance is so high for rent. So be careful of that. Have somebody help you out with it. Whenever you're buying a dental practice.
Can you clarify what you mean by the line item on your practice for rent is high?
Yeah, sure. So as your rent increases, the value of your practice decreases. Practice values are based off of a bottom line profit, and as the rent increases, the bottom line decreases. Hence, you'll get less for your practice when you go to sell it. And sometimes if you're
basically your overhead, it's a component of your overhead. Your nut is bigger, basically, right?
Yeah, it's a component of overhead, and it's inversely related to your rent and your practice value are inversely related. If you're buying a dental practice and you're getting a lease assigned to you, you don't just have to assign it. You should be able to renegotiate it with the landlord. And if you're buying a practice, that's not something that's up to the seller. A lot of times the seller will just dictate, okay, you want to buy my practice? Here's this new 5-10-year lease, and you have to assign it or assume it. It should be something that's negotiated between you and the landlord, not between you and the seller. If you're retiring or if you're looking to sell your practice, you need to have a lease in place, and you need to have a lease in place that has at least 5 years left on it. If you don't have a lease in place, nobody can buy your practice. You can't sell it. No lender will fund on a practice that doesn't have a minimum 5 years in place, sometimes 10, depending upon the dollar amount of the practice purchase. But your real estate lease controls your practice. If you have no lease, the landlord owns your practice. Don't put yourself in that position. Practice real estate solutions. This kind of goes to just optimizing your capital. There's a lot of different scenarios that can come up between real estate and buying and selling a practice, where there's solutions that a third-party real estate component could make your transaction. Like, for example, if you're purchasing a practice and you don't want to buy the real estate, there could be a third party come in and give you a solution. Maybe you're relocating and renovating your existing practice, and you'd like to exchange a long lease for cash incentives from the landlord to do the construction project. That could be accomplished. And maybe you need a third-party real estate to partner with you in real estate. If you have multiple practices and the real estate is available for sale in all of them, if you kept accumulating and buying real estate, tons of your capital would be tied up in real estate. And your capital is going to be working harder and optimized in your practice. So know that there's a lot of different solutions out there to optimize your capital. The money you have invested should be working the hardest for you. And if it gets too tied up in real estate, it's locked and you can't use it. So no, there's a lot of different options out there for you. Next, we're going to get into practice transition and talk kind of about what's going on in the practice transition market. The market is active. The activity and the prices are at record high levels. Practices are selling for higher multiples of gross collections than ever before, and there is a lot of consolidation movement throughout the market. So there's probably doctors here who want to know how much their practice is worth, and that's a pretty loaded question, and there's a number of different variables that go into how much your practice is worth. And it depends on, the dollar amount of the collections, and certain practices are more desirable than others. And I'll kind of break down what those thresholds are. So practices that are producing over $1 million in collections, I would probably say are the most desirable and could sell at the highest premium because the higher collection amount makes for a higher net profit, so the higher the premium that could be paid. But $1 million practice, those are going to get a lot of activity. They're going to sell generally. Practices that are producing between 500,000 and $1 million will also get a lot of activity, and there's a lot of buyers for practices between 500,000 and $1 million. And back to the $1 million practice. The premium you could see on a high performing practice could be up to 150% of the gross collections. We just recently closed a practice where a doctor received 160% of gross collections from a corporate buyer. That doctor was also staying on for more than 2 years. If you stay on for more than 2 years, that also increases the premium, but you can see up to 150% on the highest producing practices, I would say, is the high level. Practices between 500 and $1 million are going to sell anywhere from 65 to 125% of collections. And later in the presentation, I'm going to go over kind of the factors that make up what factors make a practice sell for a premium and what factors make it sell for less. Practices that are producing between 200 and 500,000, those get a little tougher to sell, and like the particulars of the practice become ever more important, like where the location is, what the profitability is, if it's Medicaid, if it's fee for service. But in that price point between 250 to 500,000, there are buyers for, but it takes a little longer to sell, and they could sell anywhere from 65 to 85% of collections generally. Practices producing under 200,000, they're tough to sell. If you sell them at all, you may end up doing a chart sale or a merger. But any practice that's producing under the cost that it costs to build out a new office tend to be a little tougher, a little bit tougher to sell. And the variation you see in price, the lower the price point you get, the higher variation you see in what practices sell for. Chart sales could sell for 10% of the collection amount, or they could sell up to 50, 60%. But the lower you go in price, the higher variance you see in the sale prices.
Excuse me, Joe. Just wanted to give you a heads up that we are at just about at 7:15, and your presentation is generating a lot of questions. So if you can wrap it up in the next 5 minutes or so, that'll give us time for Q&A and concluding remarks.
Yeah, I'll go through a little. I'll speed it up a little bit so we can get to some questions. Next, we're going to talk about just DSOs in general. There's a lot of misconceptions about them. A lot of people don't know if they're good or they're bad or what they do. Basically, they're taking over a lot of the operational components of a dental office and leaving the clinical side of the practice up to you. Some are good, some are bad. They offer a new form of exit strategy. They weren't around years ago, and they're a new method to sell to a new buyer. The factors that drive practice value are collection amount, the transition period, how long you're going to stay on, how profitable your practice is, how nice your facility is, how new your build out is, how strong your hygiene program is, and how many active patients you have are probably the biggest factors that drive practice price and value. Practice transition for buyers. If you're a buyer, look hard, look often, look at as many practices as possible for when you do find the right one. If you don't look at a lot of practices, you're not going to be in position to make a decision. So look, explore, get as many practice prospectuses as you can, talk to as many people as you can. It's hard to find a practice right now, and you need help from anybody who will give it to you. Know that if you're buying a practice, there's a practice broker usually represents the seller. They don't represent you. There are other vehicles to get representation, get a second opinion. We can help out with an appraisal, a letter of intent, a lease review, an unbiased third-party opinion who's going to work for you. Practice prospectus, what to look for. When you get a practice prospectus, you're going to get the financials, a profit and loss statement, a tax return. You're going to get production by provider, a breakdown of the production, and see what that practice is doing in collections and what procedures they're performing. With a practice prospectus, there's many line items of a profit and loss statement that are adjusted to a new buyer and are potential areas and add backs, value adds for a new practice buyer. So knowing what to look for in a practice prospectus is really where all the value comes into play. And if you know how to read them well and create value on how you could change the line items and adjust them, that's the value creation. And that's very important. And don't forget about the post-sale considerations. This doctor that you buy from is going to work with you after the fact. So there's many things to consider there. Finally, if you're selling your practice, get organized, get prepared, have your financial statements in order, streamlined, make sure your tax returns and your profit and loss match each other. Make sure when the practice is ready for sale, it looks like an efficient, fine, well-oiled machine. Those practices are going to sell at a premium and quicker. What we can give you, anybody listening, is a free practice evaluation, complimentary lease review, demographic reports and competition analysis, and a discounted practice buyer services. If you're considering any sort of practice ownership opportunity, we'll have something to say about it and hopefully give you some value-added advice.
Well, I think that anybody who attended this would agree with that. That was a great job, Joe. Thanks for packing in so much valuable information and for doing it in such a succinct manner. Sorry to have to rush you a little bit there, but as I said, we got a very engaged audience, and we probably won't be able to get to all the questions, but let's dive in here. And some of these questions were asked early on, and you may have addressed them, but I think many of them may warrant a little bit of review and elaboration.
All right.
First question I got is, what is the most desirable avenue for becoming a practice owner? And you certainly talked about that today.
Buying a practice is most people's first choice. It's the plug and play, instant cash flow. It's the choice of champions. It's what everybody wants. But again, limited. The market is limited.
Okay. What factors determine if you qualify for a dental practice loan? I know you mentioned that it's pretty simple for most practitioners to get a loan, but what factors would you say?
It's pretty simple. The lenders are going to look at if your project is feasible. The startup is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you're allocating those loan amounts, if you don't have any, if you have a responsible credit, a financial picture of yourself, a good credit score, student debt is not really looked at negatively. But in order, let's talk about things not to qualify for a loan. If you have like tax liens or bankruptcies or an exorbitant amount of credit card debt, or very high personal expenses that your W-2, your labor can't support, then you won't get funded. But if you have any sort of responsible type of financial picture, you should have no problem getting a loan. Mm-hmm. The lender's going to look at the practice itself is the collateral for buying a practice. If the practice itself cash flows, the lender's more worried about the cash flow from the operations. And if you could show that on a financial statement, you don't need to have much money in the bank, if any, to get a loan for a dental practice. You just can't have anything that's, extraordinarily bad.
One more good reason to get your credit card debt under control.
Yeah.
For sure. Do DSOs tend to bid up the price of desirable practices?
Well, we like to bid up. We like to have DSOs compete. What can really drive up the price of your practice is competition amongst buyers. And that's even individual buyers, and especially the DSOs. They don't like to lose to their competitor. And if they know, they have the FOMO, the fear of missing out. If the fear of missing out on the practice and thinking they're not going to get it, that's going to drive up the price. We've had prices come up 30, 40% of where they were negotiating, 30, 40% more once they learned that this was a competitive process. You want a broker that's going to make your practice sale. It's got to be like the Kentucky Derby. You want 20 horses running in it. You can't have a one race, a one horse in the bidding process. If there's only one guy looking at the practice, the leverage is created when we get multiple buyers all looking at the same practice and them knowing it and making them create that fear that they're going to miss out.
Okay. I think you addressed this. What's that?
That's our specialty.
Okay, good to know. What percentage of your recent deals have been startups? I think you said 20 in the last year, if I remember correctly.
We probably do about 50. We probably do about 70% of our transactions are real estate deals, either being like a startup, a relocation, an expansion, and like probably 30% practice sales. And again, it's just that's a reflection of what the market has to offer in practice ownership. If we had more viable practices, they would fly off the market.
Mm-hmm. And a follow-up to that is, what characterizes the typical practitioner who does choose to buy a startup?
A startup is an entrepreneur, somebody who likes things their way, type A. They don't like, they're go-getters, and they're very confident in their skill set. They're not really worried about competition. They're people who want to control their own destiny and do it and not wait around,
Mm-hmm. Got it. This question came. Go ahead.
Sorry, Dan. Just and it depends the type of provider. If you're a Medicaid office or focusing on lower PPOs, you can go in a market in lower income areas. You could do. There is no practice acquisition market. It's all startup, because if you go in the right location, your practice grows so rapidly. There is no market to wait around for the doctor who's selling in higher volume, lower income offices. So it also depends on what type of provider you are. There's different, the startup and practice acquisition is different depending upon who you're catering to.
Yeah. Do you work with many practices that accept Medicaid? Because I know I've worked with some, and if they're smart and they can manage their overhead and can deal with high volume, they can do quite well.
Yeah, a lot of our offices, a good portion work with Medicaid, but they usually either do 100% Medicaid or they'll do 30 to 50%. It varies, but yes, we work with clients that do Medicaid, and they're not afraid of it, and they know how to manage it and specialize it, and they can be very successful practices.
Mm-hmm. This next question came from, I believe, somebody in New Hampshire, and I think the answer to this question does depend on the state, but the question is, do you see people other than dentists being successful as practice owners?
We work with other practice professionals, and sure. There's a number of healthcare professionals that are successful owners. We work with healthcare practitioners who work outside of the hospital network. So, a veterinarian, a dermatologist, an ear, nose, and throat. There's a number of disciplines that you can be successful.
I think the question is, do you see people other than dentists being successful as dental practice owners?
Oh, not so much. Not. We do, but I would say the dentist is generally a better operator than the non-dentist.
And aren't there some legal restrictions by state? I think some states flat out prohibit a non-dentist from owning a practice.
Yeah, in Illinois, there needs to be a dentist who's associated with each office that holds their license up and has takes responsibility for all the clinical work. But there are ways in Illinois that non-dentists can own practices through asset purchase agreements and just kind of the legal setup. It can be done in Illinois.
Okay. Got it. Well, we've got many more questions, and as I promised at the beginning, I will share these questions with Joe, who will follow up offline one-on-one and make sure that your questions are answered. Or maybe we'll share them with everybody, because I think there are a lot of valid ones, but we do need to move on to our concluding remarks so we can...
We'll answer every one of them, Danny, at some point. So
yep. Thank you. I know you will. All right, everybody. In a few days, you'll receive an email with instructions on how to apply for your CE credit for this very exciting and informative webcast. And at this time, I want to now invite you to mark your calendars for Thursday, March 24th at 6 p.m. Central Time, when my guests, the dynamic duo, will be Ms. Ellen Schnur and Mr. Jim Messier, whose presentation is entitled, Dentistry is a Team Sport. Empower your team to be championship performers. Clinical and technical skills are critical to your success in dentistry. Equally important to your clinical outcomes and bottom line, however, are behavior skills, the way your team interacts among themselves and with current and prospective patients. While you can't always predict what interactions will arise, you can influence your team to adapt and respond in new and more effective ways. Join World Series winning pitcher Jim Messier and professional applied improviser Ellen Schnur for a unique and lively session. Together, they will show you how to empower everyone on your team to foster a culture that makes everyone feel safe and respected, deal more effectively with difficult people, become more aware of their impact on others, listen like they want to be heard, adapt to uncertainty and change, develop greater resiliency, and learn about conflict transformation. It all happens on Thursday, March 24th at 6 p.m. Central. Until then, this is Danny Bobrow, thanking you for your ongoing commitment to practice perfection, and once again, thanking you, Joe Rossi, for a terrific presentation. Goodbye, everybody.